came up in a work session. But then when we went back and rethought some of these things, we then revisited things we thought were done. And that's why I agree with the do it a section at a time so that we can address it. Obviously, the purpose in section 1 is, we want to have a person of these policies to establish a uniform and equitable system of personnel administration for employees in the city of Nowthen. My notes, why are we doing this update?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Can we call the meeting to order?
Sure.
Thank you.
We are calling this meeting to order. It's a work session, May 23rd, 2024, 6:10 p.m. Scott, would you call roll, please? Sure.
Mayor Gillon,
Present.
Councilmember Rainville,
Present.
Councilmember Elders,
Here.
Councilmember Bryant,
Here.
Councilmember Platteville,
Present.
and Administrator Laner and Project Manager Genevieve Hirschman. I will get that wrong, I'm sorry, our presence.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody have anything to amend the agenda or?
Vote that we approve the agenda as presented.
All right, we have a motion in a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carried. So anyway, the question is, why are we doing these updates? Last fall, we were doing it because we knew there were some things that we had questions on that had to do with benefits, and we were looking to hire staff. And so we came under a time crunch because we're trying to get staff. And it took multiple rounds to figure out what it is we were doing benefit wise. I don't anticipate this one being anywhere close to that because we don't have those types of decisions to make typically. We aren't looking at taking any benefits or adjusting back any benefits different from what staff already has. But we do have a number of things in these sections, as Genevieve mentioned. Either we reference a document, a policy that isn't here, doesn't exist. Or we have some things in here that we just aren't doing. We need to know, do we do it for everybody, just supervisors, those types of things. So obviously, one of the reasons is stated in the purpose, in section 1, uniform and equitable system of personnel administration. Obviously, we want all of our documents to conform to legal requirements for the state and federal law as they pertain to statutory aid cities. We want to make sure that we have clear, consistent, objective policies that all current and future employees can understand and therefore know what's expected, what they are expected to do and what they're allowed to do. And then to establish, clearly identify the responsibilities of the employees and the delineation of authority. And we want to make sure that our city policies minimize potential liability for the city and maximize fiscal accountability for our 4,600 residents. And I know we want to get this meeting started right away. It's there in the fall when we did this, we had a deadline of trying to get people hired. Is there a deadline that we are under on this one, that we have to do something by a certain deadline? Does anybody know? So we shouldn't be under that same pressure where it's all trying and make those decisions.
Other than Genevieve has other projects she could be working on, so we don't have to do this forever.
Yeah, well, I would hope that this would take 100% of our time. So, in addition to the red square documents here, I would like council to consider that we should have some additional policies that we've talked about for years, but we haven't ever put in a policy. One being a credit card policy. Two being a public purpose expenditures policy. Public purpose expenditures. Ramsey's started this thing where they're putting flags in all the holes. You know, so there are certain things that we can do as a city that are public purpose expenditures that are allowable under statutory law. There are certain things that aren't. We should have a policy delineating what that is, rather than doing it piecemeal when something comes up and trying to, I know, is this a legitimate expense we can do? So most cities have a public purpose expenditure.
So with that public purpose expenditure, so there would be certain things that would be under that, that would already be considered in our budget? Is what you're saying? They would already be in our budget, so it's something, we're not creating something else tonight.
No, we have to research what that is statutorily and examples of what that is. But basically it says, here's things you can spend public money on, here's things you can't. So like, somebody's family member passes away, we cannot use city money to buy flowers or a memorial for them. So there's certain things we can do on our own, there's certain things that the city is allowed to do, like holiday decoration, things like that. There's certain things that we're not allowed to do. And it seems ridiculous sometimes, it's like, we all work together, we just can't use city funds for this. And yeah, there's certain things that just aren't allowed. And we should clarify what that is, so rather than making it piecemeal each time, because, again, I think it's a good point, we're doing this not just for the group that's here, but every 2 years, you're likely turning over council members. Then you have to go through that again. If you got it in the book, you can say, yeah, this is allowable, this is. Came up the other night, we were talking about, staff council authorized expenditures. We've talked about this for years, what is the authorized amount? In one of our iterations here, that actually allowed the council to spend $350 without council authorization. What we've never known is that per day, per term, year, per decade, what is that? And then to make it clear, what can staff do without council approval? To define if it's in the budget, how much can be spent. If it's not in the budget, what do we do? But trying to figure out what was in that 1,400-page bill that hit the floor Monday night. Nobody's quite sure what's in it yet. There is a lunch and learn from small cities on June 4th at noon. They're gonna try and explain some of what they found. But in that, I heard that they did get in the new Minnesota version of the FMLA. And we should be looking at that as part of our policy as well, because we do reference FMLA, and now we have to reference the Minnesota one. I also understood in that they exempted volunteer firefighters and EMTs from the ESST. So I didn't realize by having part-time employees that put us over the employee mark. So obviously anything there, and then once we find out what other 2024 legislative changes that affect our policy, we want to incorporate those in where they're appropriate as well. And if anybody else, when they were looking at this, thought of any other policies we've talked about over the years, but just don't have a policy on it, we should get that on the list so that we can start Genevieve doing the background. Councilor Rainbow.
I think that before we ask Genevieve to do that as council, we need to agree that the staff can take this up. I think once we have a list, we can look at that list and prioritize those items on that list.
Yeah, I was speaking specifically about the legislative.
Even the other things that you mentioned, so.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that's things that came to my mind and we've discussed over the years that I didn't see in here. And my point in doing that was to say, if there are other things that people have said, yes, we've talked about this for years, or here's something that the council may want to include in a policy, certainly this would be the time to bring it up before we get to that section. And then have to go back and revisit a section. Mr. Mayor, let's get to phase 2. All right. right, do we want to go section by section?
Yes.
Do we want to address those that I just brought up?
They were not in the agenda. Skip through phase two. Because that sounds like there's research involved with both of those. It'd be an addendum to the policy.
All right, how long do we want to go tonight?
One more hour and a half. 7:30.
And everybody agrees 7:30?
7:30, 7:45. So.
Okay, so these items are, again, to address conflicting information and make corrections. So when we do section by section, these will be part of the section. So for example, everything about drug tests will again be section 2. The decisions made tonight will be reflected in that when we go through the section by section. So the first, if we look at the red outline page, on page 2, if we look at drug test, pre-employment testing, all employees. The first line is verbatim what is in the policy today. I've bolded the word or words that will be discussed. So right now, the policy says all candidates shall have pre-employment drug and alcohol testing. This is not happening currently for the city of Nowthen, that's the conflict we're trying to resolve. The league does not recommend testing all employees. There are very strict state and federal guidelines that would need to be adhered if you were going to test all employees. So the question for this first question is, would the city like to perform pre-employment drug and alcohol testing for every employee or only for CDL drivers? CDL drivers is a federal requirement. There is no option to avoid drug testing for those employees.
And we had some possibly, if we decided not to go with all employees, would there be a condition then placed in the policy that at any time they could be asked to take a drug and alcohol test?
That is a suspicion clause, so reasonable suspicion clause, and so that is separate from pre-employment. So you could say, we don't drug test everybody before hiring, but we can, if we have reasonable suspicion, drug test any employee who we suspect. There are strict requirements that we follow for reasonable suspicion. It can't be just ad hoc or random.
And those people have to be trained. Right, to be able to determine that.
Or
Yes.
I would suggest that we only go CDL. Yeah. And then just follow any policy that the league is able to provide. And then we just, I know that in your packet, you have options. As far as locations for testing.
I like CDL. I mean, we're not gonna drug test someone intern that's helping do office work or something. And go once a week.
And part of having a CDL, you have to renew it on an annual basis, you gotta have your health card, and part of that is drug testing. It goes along with it, so.
The level of risk.
That's reasonable, it should be something.
So CDL only? So question for the council and the mayor, do we want to get a majority? I heard 2 people say CDL, I didn't hear anything from anybody else. How would you like this to work before we notate that CDL was the decision made tonight? I know we're not voting on anything tonight, but if nobody says anything otherwise, I'll just take notes on the screen. So if,
No, I think we should make it clear that the council has agreed.
We can vote. It's a legitimate meeting, so I move that on the issue of pre-employment testing, that we only test CDL. Employees that need to have a CDL.
I'll second.
Okay, any other questions? So let me ask this, pre-employment. And they're going to, they may not have CDL, but they're going to get one. We're gonna ask them to drive trucks, say Isaac. I don't know, he's out, but. We have an employee that we hired that. The intention is they're going to get a CDL, I don't know if they have or not.
Right.
Would this apply to them if we're anticipating they're going to drive the truck, but they don't currently have a CDL?
Mr. Mayor? I would say yes, if he's going for a CDL, he's gonna have to take that test. We would use the results of that.
So from a pre-employment,
Mr. Mayor, there is a clause within the CDL policy itself that says if you are working for an employer and you switch to a CDL driver, that drug test must be followed. So the CDL policy itself is very specific on what the testing is, who it applies to, when it applies.
I think,
so I saw two head shake over here, that if they're going to be hired for a position that requires it, but they don't have it yet, we still pre-test. I saw a head not shaking, no, so
I would,
Was it one second? No. If, right, so my motion is that pre-employment, if the CDL is required for that job, we have that test. I would add to that motion that if you are existing employed, since you are currently employed and you move to a job that is required to have a CDL, then you have that test because it's part of the CDL and that serves as acknowledgement that you've done it.
yes, and I understand that part, I'm just saying that if they're hired with the idea that you're going to have to drive a big truck, let's find out about the drug test before we go to all the expense of getting the CDL.
so I would, Mr. Mayor,
Sir,
I would disagree with that. For the simple fact that we can continue to use a certain individual for that. Let's just say we hired him on, we don't do pre-employment drug test. Once he goes to get his CDL and his health card, he goes and gets it, now he will get drug tested. I don't know why the city would take on the incurred cost of drug testing him up front until the CDL takes effect, right? So I wouldn't do a pre-employment and then another one when he goes.
We would follow the CDL guidelines.
Right.
Which is get a drug test. But you can have somebody that you hire this year, and then a year and a half from now, it's like, oh, I'm gonna go get my CDL so I can drive the plow truck. It's like, then we decide to drug test, and that doesn't make any sense. It's like follow the guidelines of the CDL.
so to clarify it, I'm not sure what I'm hearing. What Mary, what you had said, and I think it's consistent with what Jason said, if we're hiring somebody that's likely going to be driving a big truck, do the drug test initially, pre-employment, so if there's a problem, we're not anticipating him driving that truck. Okay, so that's your motion.
Mhm.
Right, so that is the motion. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
I don't have it written down, I don't know exactly how it's spelled out, what we're trying to do. It's my understanding, if, when it comes time to do their CDL, they'll have the drug test, but that's not what I heard, so.
Right, so we're saying that if I even consider them from CDL, if they fail the drug test. Now, again, if there's somebody here who,
I'll just say nay, and we can,
Okay.
we'll move on.
CDL only and has a pre-employment for anybody who's likely to be driving the big trucks.
So they are getting tested before.
If they're gonna drive the big trucks.
That's the motion.
Mr. Mayor, if I may,
Yes,
this is where going through the section by section is gonna be really helpful, because then we'll be able to see the CDL policy and be able to understand that. So to simplify this question, we could change the wording to say, would the city like to perform pre-employment drug testing on all employees?
No.
So I think that is a much easier question, and we can move the CDL to once we truly understand what CDL is, because CDL in and of itself is not addressed in the policy at all right now. So CDL drug testing and the requirements for that is going to be a big section.
So that was my point in wanting to do this in conjunction with the section. Because we don't have context here, and yes, so if you're saying, oh, that's already covered here, but we just spent 10 minutes discussing it when it was in there. If we were in the section where there's context to it, maybe this would have been straight. It doesn't, you know, if you're hiring somebody that's likely to be driving the truck, we're saying, you know, we're not doing any drug testing ahead of time. But then we're gonna do it when they apply for the CDL, and they may not pass it. But if we're saying right now, we're not gonna do it on anybody but CDL drivers, then Councilor Clyde.
So. I'm assuming that if someone would not pass the drug test, if they were already hired, that at that point, we wouldn't even have them take the test, nor would we give them the CDL, because you would assume that you'd be able to have suspicion at that point.
Well, did you, well, you wouldn't necessarily have suspicion, but did you hire them with the intention they're going to drive CDL? Because, you know, what Scott had mentioned was, we've got somebody who's been working here for a while, and they said, I want to move to big trucks. So they've been here a year and a half, and they want to get a CDL. That's a different thing than saying, we're hiring, you know, like John Doe here, with the idea that they'll get a CDL at some point and drive the big trucks. From a pre-employment standpoint, we want to know if they even qualify, because we're banking on them driving the big trucks. And then they go apply for the CDL. So they don't get CDL.
So do we want to spend more?
If they're going to drive the big trucks.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilor Rader.
I guess I want to go back to Genevieve's question. So that we're doing it section by section. So we don't want to test all employees, but we're done with it. Okay? When we get to the CDL portion, we'll have that discussion.
So there's a CDL portion of it.
Yeah.
Saying, okay.
Because right now we don't have policy.
There's not a CDL portion in the policy, but per federal regulations, it must be.
Do we have that federal regulation with us? For CDLs?
No, because it's dependent on the
Okay.
drug and alcohol policy that will be created is dependent on the questions that we're asking.
Well, that's a whole nother conversation.
So this references page 10, so on page 10 of the thing, we have employment check, reference background credit, if there's any drug and alcohol. Rating.
So the personnel policy is up on the screen as well. And it is highlighted where this sentence in question is. So for Mr. Mayor,
Yeah,
if I may make a suggestion, there are a couple of items in the red box page that will, depending on the answers, will determine the next steps. So we could simplify tonight to go through those questions that we need a yes or a no before we can, figure out what will be discussed. And then we can get a lot accomplished tonight, and then for the next meeting, go through section by section, because we'll at least, some of the big questions, such as all candidates will determine one drug policy, and CDL candidates will determine another policy.
so right now,
Go ahead, please.
so right now, the initial answer, which goes to page 10, drug and alcohol testing. All candidates after conditional offer of employment has been extended shall have pre-employment drug and alcohol tests in accordance with the city drug and alcohol testing policy or the Federal Department of Transportation regulation. So what we'd be striking is that first part of that sentence.
Correct.
And there'll be no pre-employment drug and alcohol testing, but there will be drug and alcohol testing policy for any DOT.
Correct, so depending on the answer to the next question, the next question is the same sentence, but it's just a different part of that same sentence. It says, drug testing will follow in accordance of the city's drug and alcohol testing policy, which does not exist. So the next question is, does the city want to create one? Or does the city want to strike that sentence? And then this whole chunk of the policy could potentially say, the city follows all requirements of the Federal Department of Transportation, DOT regulation 49C. And that would be the only thing that would be in this section.
So
Framework.
we wouldn't have any drug and alcohol testing policy if that were the case.
There is one that the league has drafted specifically following the Federal Department of Transportation guidelines for city drivers. And then,
And if there's suspicion.
so this part is for pre-employment, but then there is another part for suspicion.
So in that, if we have an accident, somebody gets hurt in recycling
Okay,
a park,
and
I'm saying, we're talking about the whole drug and alcohol. Right? The next big question, city's drug and alcohol testing policy. I understand we're not doing pre-employment, but are we not going to have any drug and alcohol testing policy?
right now, we're just talking pre-employment. All we're talking.
There's more drug testing coming.
There's, this is just pre-employment.
Correct, on page 17, there is, drug test reasonable suspicion, so the city could have a separate policy written or the verbiage that would address when an employee could be tested for reasonable, reasonable suspicion could just be written into this policy itself.
We've got it right here, so yeah. If anyone plays in the open ages.
Any place I go, if you're in an accident, you get a drug test.
And when we get to that section, we can talk about it. Right now, we're just talking.
Alright, and I just put, so.
So just to confirm, the answer to would the city like to perform pre-employment drug and alcohol tests for all employees, the answer is the aforementioned city's drug and alcohol testing policy does not exist. Would the city prefer to remove this statement altogether or adopt the League of Minnesota Cities non-drug, non-DOT drug and alcohol testing policy? So that's where the league has created one for non-DOT. DOT requirements are federal and there isn't anything to adapt. It's a federal requirement. But if you would like to have a non-DOT drug and alcohol policy, the league does have a billable policy of the adapted for you.
If we said we're only going to, we're not gonna test them, then we wouldn't need, we just need the DOT.
So that we decided we're not going to do pre-employment. But if you are ever going to test drug and alcohol on any non-DOT employee, you need to have the requirements of when you go.
So
Which is
this is the
what I
problem
just
then,
said.
right, this is the problem then, because we have two different sections going on here then. And the problem with having two different sections is then we're all over the place. So is there any way that we can go like this and marry those two sections rather than have them in different places, because now we're jumping? And so then it doesn't make sense, because I get the I hit the pre, but we keep going, kind of, now we're going into the other, and we didn't even know we're going to the other, so.
Since we've agreed that we're not dealing with pre-employment drug screening, I would say that this question needs to be handled back when we talk about page 18 or whatever. When we talk about drug tests and
So what should we just not do the rest of this then, and go on? Is that what you're saying?
that's fine.
Okay.
As far as if we're determining if we're gonna have a policy or not, we've said it's not relevant, maybe I'm missing something, but we're saying it's not relevant for pre-employment.
So 2 and 3 we put off then until the next.
Well,
I'm just trying to follow, is what I'm trying to do.
number one is pre-employment. Number two is pre-employment. Correct? My question, because we put it off, because the drug policy will have to come in somewhere.
Right.
On page 17, but right now, number two says all candidates after conditional offer of employment has been extended shall have a pre-employment drug and alcohol test in accordance with the policy. That's currently in our document,
We take that out.
and we don't have it, so we're
Right.
saying, take it out. And then the question is, do we keep the part about the DOT? And it's not pre-employment, so we're not doing pre-employment DOT either. Right? So somebody comes in and they have a current CDL. And how long the CDLs annually test?
I think so, yeah.
Does anybody know?
Drug testing for CDL.
That is, but I think your CDL is good for 3 years, but I have to.
Okay, so somebody comes in and they have longer, 2 years into their CDL and they apply, and they have a CDL, do we drug test? That we just said no. Then we said, I'm sorry. My understanding was they have a CDL. And if they're, again, we're not sure, but if they're good for 3 years and they're 2 years into their CDL. And they don't have to renew, when they renew, they have to do a drug test.
You have to do drug tests each year.
They annually have to renew
So
the.
we'll talk about, if we're gonna hire them into a job that requires a CDL, we're gonna drug screen them. So
Pre-employment,
that's what we said. So if they require a CDL for the job, we're gonna drug screen them. So if they have a current CDL, they're gonna be under the guise of the DOT. In addition to that, we're going to drug screen them before we hire them. If they go into a job that doesn't require a CDL, we are not gonna drug screen them. If at some point they say, I want a promotion, I wanna do something else, we are not gonna drug screen them to give them that promotion. We are going to let them take the CDL, and if they pass it, part of passing the CDL is a drug test. So I think we're covered on that piece of it, that it's like, if somebody comes in and they have an existing CDL, that doesn't matter. We're gonna, if the job is, we're hiring you to drive our $1 million piece of equipment or $250,000 snowplow, whatever it costs, like, we're gonna drug screen you to make sure that you're not on some substance as we're hiring you. If we hire you to mow the lawns or run the recycling center, and in 5 years you wanna drive snowplow, then we kind of understand your work history. We don't have any reasonable suspicion. We are gonna allow you to get your CDL and follow the normal
at
process.
which point they would do the drug test.
At which point they will do the testing.
Okay, so
So Mr. Mayor, what I'm hearing your question too is remove reference to the city's drug and alcohol testing policy in this section. Since we are not going to be testing non-DOT employees for employment, there's nothing to reference as far as testing that doesn't exist.
and how did you include, if somebody's hired for a CDL position, we do a pre-employment?
We'll look to the next, number 3. Maybe that's instituting DOT testing, or
Yes, and part of that is you have to have a very specific form signed by the employee before you can do that drug test, so. That policy covers why it's being tested and the employee is agreeing to it, so that, policy and the approval to drug testing needs to be adopted. So question 3, there's a response line, but you'll notice it just says change needed, there isn't really a question. To follow federal guidelines, now one must adopt the.
And this one says that DOT requires pre-employment testing, random testing, post-accident, reasonable suspicion, and returning to duty after absence.
That's the DOT one.
So if it's acceptable, I'm just going to put yes. The city will adopt the required policy and employee acknowledgement.
So let's go back to number 2, we're taking. I vote that we remove that statement. As stated.
And then, can I ask you in addition, say, to answer the question? Remove the statement and not adopt the non-DOT drug and alcohol testing. Right, so we have a motion. Second. Motion, Councilman Rainville, second, Councilman Flattable. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
I,
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
for number 3, then I would move that we adopt the DOT drug and alcohol policy for CDL drivers that, that the LMC has. And I'm assuming they have a form for it and all of that, I don't have to read that out.
It's fill in the blank with.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion, Councilman Rainville, second by Councilman Alders. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those on item number 2, signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Number 4 is additional requirements, federal requirements for supervisor training. So anybody who supervises in a DOT employee is required to take mandatory training. This teaches them how to identify what reasonable suspicion is, so that they understand the what requires testing. It is required for supervisors of DOT employees. It is optional for all employees. So the question would be, would you like it only for people who supervise DOT employees, or would you like it to be mandatory training for any Nowthen employee? Question.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we would follow the DOT training for supervisors. Take one at a time.
Do we have 2 supervisors? Reasonable suspicion requires.
Just point out, just to ask, we're gonna need a new ruling, and that is, because everywhere, sounds like the same thing, Councilman Wells, just 2 minimum will have to be trained. I'm guessing you'd want me to be one.
Yeah.
But, potentially.
Anyone other than the maintenance supervisor or driving technically won't have to.
But they have to be trained.
Right.
Yeah, there'd have to be 2 of us on staff over there that are trained to these standards to be able to do reasonable suspicion.
I would say train 3 staff and pick who they are.
Well, 2 other,
2 others, I was gonna say, because
because
it
if it's,
could be the
could be one
supervisor.
of, yeah. Yeah.
Are you okay if one of them the supervisor and then one more staff? You know, okay, gotcha.
How would you like that worded again for the policy?
At least 3.
All supervisors with a minimum of 3 total employees?
Wow.
Well, do we have a second first? Oh, gosh.
I'd say the motion is at a minimum, we want supervisors training in addition to supervisors. We can train the people beyond supervisors as needed.
So if it's there.
So we just say city administrator, public works supervisor, and one other, have your choice of city administrator.
Okay.
Oh. Keep telling them all the time.
I'm just gonna ask you, can I use it if I need to?
Almost.
All right.
So one of the things that says, on that specifically mandated, DOT recommends recurring training of supervisors of best practice, want to include that?
Yes.
So that's the second question, I kind of, there are 2 different lines, but, so it is required, one time they recommend annually.
Annually. Needs to be done.
Training needs to be done annually?
Yeah,
That's what they said.
it needs to be.
It's usually
Right,
not like it's-
motion.
it's gonna take it.
Especially with that, with Minnesota changing its policy on water control substances.
I would, we haven't voted on that, I would add the annual training to that.
Do we, just throwing this out there, since we're at it, we should be on the annual training? I feel like, our chief. I was just gonna say there's your third. Feel like he should,
Prior to.
And your deputies good with all training.
the deputies are already trained, but I mean, the chief is, you know, he's not here every day, but I feel like he should be trained as well.
If he. We hire, and they are already. Their chief also, but yeah.
Their training may require it already.
Yeah.
It's like there's another body that,
But
but they're not here every day.
if we have reasonable cause and I'm the only one that's around, they can still reach out to a deputy or something like that, that's right. If these other 2 individuals, but yes.
So
We gotta cover it.
I guess the general question here is, as you mentioned, the fire chief, because that's one of the things that obviously there are fire department policies on how recently you can be ingesting drug and alcohol with the understanding that we have to include the fire department as total employees. And in this, it says this applies to all employees. We have additional policies apply to fire department, but do these apply to all of the fire department as well?
Does it not say,
I don't know, I'm just saying from a reasonable suspicion standpoint, if there's a fire and 13 pickups show up and one of them was at a graduation all afternoon, and I'm the fire chief, I'm gonna be like, you hold back. Thank you for coming in, but hold back today.
Yeah, I'm just saying, in the policies, when I'm going through it, so this applies to all employees, and we just never thought about these things applying to the fire department.
so,
Because we created our own under Chief Schmidt. But in that, it referenced back to St. Francis policy.
so Mr. Mayor,
That was my radar.
on the bottom of page 5. Any provision contained in contract, city council and an individual employee shall be exempt from any of the provisions in these policies that are under contract. Maybe we add that fire into that sentence, that the firefighters have their own policies. And I don't even, it's been so long ago that I don't know how detailed those were, you know. There's a lot more detail in these policies than there is the fire department. based on the fact that they're part-time on call.
One of the things when we set up those policies, because it was going back and forth between St. Francis lawyers and our lawyers, was St. Francis at one point said, we're just going to tie this to our employee manual. So we didn't create additional policies, they just tied it back to, that goes back to this. So there are some things specific, and I remember the coming up because it could be the chief, it could be a captain, it could be somebody just comes up and says, I smell you and you're not getting on the truck. But we'll have to see how they link.
Well, let's put that on a different slide with his policies.
Is everybody getting a fire chief off?
No.
No.
It's-
So we just have to see how, whatever policy this for the fire department, how they tie to this. Because currently, this policy says, this policy applies to all employees, and they're considered employees. Any provision contained in contracts, so
Mhm.
we don't really have a contract with.
No, so I have to work on that. But the other thing is just under purpose, other than firefighter. This reflected the law for employees.
Yeah, we could just put that up there, because you do have it called out that independent contractors, so you could add
You just do that under there.
provision there. Oh, I don't remember the purpose, scope. These policies do not apply to the following, so you could add.
Yeah, I think we gotta be careful, it doesn't have to, they don't apply, but. We need to have, if they're superseded by fire department policies. If there isn't something in the fire department policies, then these are in effect. Because right now they drive big rigs, but they don't have to have CDL. Just.
It's a separate line item that's basically these policies that are superseded for superseded by fire department policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if fire department doesn't have a policy, it reverts back to this.
Fire.
Well, we do it, right?
Why not?
All right, so on that one. We have the administrative public works supervisor and another designated employee, fire chief and. Sheriff's deputies.
Mr. Mayor, should get
Yes, ma'am.
The motion was made on number 4, I did not capture.
So I'm gonna go it on.
I don't know.
Would be that we would do the, working training for the supervisors, which include city attorney, public works.
State administrator.
What did I say?
Judge Lane.
Oh, city administrator, sorry. Public works supervisor and one of, well, we had talked originally, one of administrator's choice, or we could supplement that one. And that we, and the deputy.
You have to pick.
Yeah,
Yep.
and that we would offer the annual, we would do the annual trip.
Boom.
Second.
Oh. Motion by Councilman Rangel, second by Councilman Brian, any others? Seeing here none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Next question is random and reasonable suspicion testing. The current policy says any city employee shall be subject to drug and alcohol tests randomly or due to reasonable suspicion. So the first question would be, do we want to leave the statement as is and have all employees subject to random and reasonable suspicion, or just leave it?
I would say, I would go for all.
Oh,
I would move all.
So keep it as is or all.
Yep.
So that's the motion.
Hmm.
I'll second. Any other discussion? Seeing, none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
I,
Opposed? Motion carries.
So then, because we removed the policy, I will, when I go back and make these changes, I will make sure where this sentence is, that all people are subject to random and reasonable suspicion, does clarify what the rules are for that. It's not just that sentence, that there is an explanation of what is a random and what is reasonable suspicion. If it is not there currently, I can't recall if it's detailed enough.
So that will be in the whatever version of the drug and alcohol policy we end up with. We chose not to do it on pre-employment, but we'll have something for existing employees.
It could be a separate policy, or if that paragraph is detailed enough, then that paragraph could suffice. If it explains what random is and what reasonable suspicion is within the paragraph, then we wouldn't necessarily need to have a separate policy.
Mr. Nittner.
Councilmember Ringo?
Genevieve, so let's say it's reasonable suspicion, you're gonna put it on page, right, it's 2 pages. You really don't want 2 pages in the policy. We have to refer to addendum 4. And just put an addendum in the back versus a separate policy.
I believe that's acceptable.
And to me, that's easier, yeah, than having a whole separate policy.
Next item, number 6, the current policy says employees of the city will be compensated according to the classification schedules that have been adopted by the city council. The city currently does not have a classification schedule that was adopted by the city council. So the question is, would the city be interested in adopting classification schedules, or shall we remove this?
I would move that we remove.
Second that. Any other discussion?
Yeah. If we're doing sub 2, that's 2-7.2, 2-7.3 is the exact same thing. Basically. Talking about promotions and compensated, reasons, talks about getting steps, which we don't do.
Correct, I believe that is item number
9.
I don't see 273 listed on here, so I'm sorry if that's
Oh,
Oh, I just,
bullets. So it should be there, but if there's probably a different wording that needs to be placed, but in place.
understood, I think I missed to see the higher. The section,
and we, to Dan's point, 273, we don't have steps. Just looking, so you're removing the motion 273 as well.
I would say 27.
Jesus, it's.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Different than her box,
Mhm.
so
Yes.
it's in there.
the question is in here, the formatting, I missed adding 273.
Oh.
So to confirm, we are removing all references to classifications. Number 7, the coverage in the policy.
So let's take that as a motion.
The motion is second, then I start talking about 7.3, now it's in the red box, so we never.
So we're including 273,
Update to seven. Yeah, well, and then my motion.
right? And agree with that, so. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Number 7 talks about reimbursement for phones. The League of Minnesota City does have an entire section on their for their personnel policy model about phones and using personal phones for city business. So the recommendation would be to add this additional notice that the league has drafted into Nowthen's policy.
I would move that.
How many phones are not on a monthly basis? We're gonna pay for somebody's phone.
My,
which they, no.
Give them, no pay. For a while, pay the same.
Back when this first came up, phones weren't common, they were expensive.
I totally agree, but like, and before you pay by the minute or you got 30 minutes or 150 minutes, it matters. Now like everybody's on an unlimited plan or. And it's like, it's a part of life now. I will tell you. Several large businesses, including mine, have struck that long ago. It's like, if you wanna use your phone for work. Great, if not. Use Teams. Exactly, and it's like everybody carries their phone around now, it's like, it's just part of everyone.
so are you saying it should be a stipend or it shouldn't? Okay, you want to,
Now,
because my husband's company actually pays for his phone. My company did give me, gave me money for my phone.
so they moved it.
Huh?
Your company said we should stipend.
They did, and they actually gave it to me. So, but I also, okay, but I will also clarify that. I was having people call me from Canada and my bill was getting. So I went and said, we didn't pay for this. So then they started that. So there was a reason for me.
It's like, it's different if someone's like, yeah, obviously got their policies that people are traveling.
Right.
Internationally,
Right.
and you're calling in from China, but I mean,
Well, that's what I'm just saying. I'm saying, I'm saying, do we need it? Is there a reason for it? And if there is a reason, then what is that? Because in my case, there was a reason. For other people, it wasn't.
to be totally honest, if we have like our inside the shop, we don't pay for the stipends, and for the people that need a phone inside the shop, we just buy them on. We
Yeah.
buy them a phone because it's cheaper and.
Yep.
And we just hook it up to the wireless and then they use the wireless.
Yep. That's what I'm just saying. I'm like, it's a discussion. Yeah. So, Mr. Graham.
All right,
I remember when this was instituted, one of the problems we had when we were supplying phones to them, they lose them all. And so they lose them. And so this then had a buy-in, it's your own phone, you don't wanna lose your own phone. So then we covered part of the stipend. So maybe if we choose not to go with the stipend, that's fine. The city, the employee then has the right to say, don't call me on my phone. So how does the city administrator or the city staff communicate with staff that's in the field? If they say, if you're not paying, I'm not using it, don't call me. So then the other thing is, and phone costs, at least in how I've gotten it, is my rates have gone down compared to when we voted on this, it was a $40 stipend. So I don't know average now, how much a cell phone costs anymore.
Well, and you don't pay per phone call anymore either.
No,
Right.
So there's a big difference there.
so maybe it's.
but David, though. I'm guessing Public Works will do data, because, manuals aren't hard copy anymore, you look data up online, so. Do you have any idea how they're using them, Scott?
They use them in all different ways, data and cell phone. I think one of the things we just, I don't wanna get the cart before the horse, but what we need to think about here too is if you take a look at the policy here. If you're using your own personal cell phone and something happens at the city and there's an investigation, now you give up your cell phone.
And
I
that's.
think I read somewhere here that the recommendation is from the league that. The council may want to consider. Purchasing a separate cell phone, not that I want to carry two cell phones, but if you're gonna do something like that. As an employee of the city, why would you continue to do work on your personal cell phone if it's subject to something like this? And they should be separate.
Are you talking about like emails and your cell phone and things like that?
Or phone calls, stuff.
Anything. I'm text messaging a council member and something comes up and something's under investigation, my phone goes away and they take my personal cell phone. And they can go through all of it. That's the whole reason why we're looking at your personal emails right now. I'm trying to get you guys business emails. If something was to happen, that everything just work on it, right? The league is also talking about that should pertain to cell phones. Because in my case, I got personal on there, I got work on there and all that kind of stuff, and yes, I get a $40 stipend, but even that doesn't eliminate that. So to get away from that, you got a work cell phone that's just for work, and then you got a personal cell phone that's just personal.
Are we considering, would that be a consideration for all employees or would that be a consideration for just administrative?
So certain people that get it. Yeah, I mean, I would recommend that, your public works would be in there, because if you're calling them out or on the weekends, or you got an emergency snowplow, whatever, right? Work, and Natalie and I probably, I guess. I mean, I don't think I need to have my part-time folks, but I certainly wouldn't do it for my recycling folks. But you're seeing more and more people we used to, years gone by in my previous world, it used to be two phones the whole time, then it went back to one, and then it went back to two for these reasons. People didn't want personal mixing with work, and something was to come up, oh boy. And just losing your cell phone until the investigation's over would be bad enough, right? But
Mr. Ray,
any text messages or anything would be, I'm sorry. Yeah.
just in the example you mentioned, if you were texting a council member, you need to be aware that the council member or his phone would also.
And I was gonna say, if we're talking about that,
Yeah.
our phones are probably gonna get requested sooner than Public Works.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't justifying which was more important than the other.
No, I'm just saying, if you were talking about
Yeah,
doing something for council,
Mhm.
so that we can have,
or even emails, you guys send me emails on the phone and I send them back to you, it's all that stuff there. So I didn't want to muddy the waters, but I think that's something.
No.
As you're talking about stipends, I think you also, we should need to talk about, does it make sense to maybe consider separating personal and work, that way by separate phone?
for both staff and council.
If you do council, then would that phone just go to the next council? Would it be like just phones? from the
It'd
city?
be like a laptop, right? You have your own email where you're a council member on a laptop, let's just say, and you're using that city email for all your work, and then if you're not a council member any longer, we wipe it clean, and the next person take over that.
Okay. But just say you can't write the same now.
Yeah, that's true. We move it on to the next person,
So, Mr. Mayor, for this item, it sounds like it's kind of twofold. The league's recommendation is to add this section, regardless of who pays the bill, cell phone records about city business are subject. Because if you are going to be having city employees using their personal phones, the policy needs to make them aware of the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, so that they are aware that because they text back another employee, it doesn't matter if it's the city paying for the bill or it's their personal cell. So that section is recommended to be added. And then it sounds like we should add a separate line item to be discussed. What do we want to do for phones across the board?
So I have a question then as far as Mr. Stein.
That's my plan.
So if that, let's say I'm your employee, I'm your employee, and you give me the standard practices act, and I'm like, I can't do that. I don't wanna be subject to that. Your public works said, I don't wanna do that, I mean,
You can bet they won't answer any calls.
right, so that's what I'm
Certainly, if
saying.
you take the stipend away, that's gonna be possibly the case too.
But even the stipend, you're actually telling someone, I mean, for me, okay, I can even say, my husband required his company to give him a phone because he refused, unless it was by emailing on a computer that they bought him, he refused to answer any phone calls on his personal phone. And because of the nature of his business, he knew what could happen, so therefore he was like, nope.
Yeah.
And they had to. So what I'm just saying is, how would we handle it as a council if an employee actually said that they haven't? I mean, they right now to accept the job, but we have to do this in an interview where we require something like this within the interview, having them know that is what I'm hearing from you, correct?
Yes, and that's the end goal of this personnel policy is they're hired, we've offered them the job, but they get to review all of the policy and they sign it, they agree to it as part of the terms of their employment. So, for existing employees,
So Councilmember Reagan, in fact, you were talking when we first started this policy, part of that was if we didn't pay the stipend, they just weren't going to use.
Yeah.
They would respond to calls. So in a case like this, and again, I want to be careful, we need to have the caveat that we're discussing options, we have not decided, other than what we voted on, we haven't decided on anything. Because this verbiage gets out and I could see suddenly nobody uses their phone. They wouldn't answer Scott's call.
So, and Mr. Mayor,
That's what
I
we're
think that has been on Scott's shoulders to say, to let staff know these are just discussions. This is, but state law, data practice says we have to tell you this. If you're using your own phone, these are the guidelines that you're using it on. If you do not, then we need to have a second piece to this policy that says, if you're not going to use your own phone, then we have to have a policy to say, okay, then we'll add to this policy that, okay, then we will buy you a burner phone. And you are responsible for that burner phone. And if you lose it, there's a fine, you pay. And that, even like back to the IT, there's a question, I have a question in the IT part about responsibility for city equipment. So that is another piece of that. I would like to see the data practice act number, the statute, just so that if they want to go look for something, they could. But that would be on the to-do list to figure out what are we gonna do about this, and they say, no, I don't want to. And I think it has been explained to them. Whether it's just a refresher, I don't know, but it's up to Scott to make them understand that this isn't effective Monday. So,
And I won't bring this back to staff until we decide exactly what's going to look like.
well, but it's, if they listen to the
If they
meeting,
saw it,
so better to just, we are having these discussions, nothing is set in stone yet. Just so that, because the rumor mill goes, the rumor goes.
I hope they're not shutting their phone off, right?
Yeah, could be.
I think the list is long. And we went through this at work, everybody used to have a stipend, it was like. The phone policy and what it costs to run a phone is substantially different than it was 10 or 15 years ago, and it's like. If you're choosing to not use your phone because someone needs to get a hold of you, there's probably some other performance discussions that you're gonna have. And it's like. Yes, there's a risk of data privacy, I also know that. All of my email, all of my team stuff, everything is on this thing, and I don't wanna carry 2 phones,
I don't even want that.
so
I wouldn't want to carry 2 phones either. I've done it multiple times in my career, but I don't like the fact that somebody could be looking at text messages that I'm sending to my wife because I texted the mayor one time and Mary on something, and now my phone is subjected to everything else.
So that's just,
And you lose your phone for.
and that's just happened at my job. Just literally happened.
That would be nice.
Oh.
So, Mr. Mayor, for this one, shall I put more discussion and information as needed?
I certainly think so, maybe, I guess. Let me ask a question, on 7, payphone reimbursement, is that our policy there?
Says may be authorized, so it's not a given. So that is like, if
Well, it says phone and travel expenses.
may be authorized.
Yeah, maybe.
So this is, I really like that maybe, because if we send someone somewhere and they, what, if somebody has to download the repair manual for all of the equipment and it burns through their data pack and they get charged $20, yes, we'll cover that. Your normal, hey, it's snowing out, I need you to come in, we're not gonna cover that. Or they call in because they have a flat tire, they feel that they get stuck, and we need to go get them. We're not gonna cover that.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'm gonna leave this one as more discussion and information is needed.
So,
In the,
with what we just discussed, do we know what information that, Mary, you asked about copy of the government data practices act, right?
Well, Genevieve has the verbiage there, I just want the number of that act, so that if they wanted to reference it. Like we do with the DOT numbers, our state statutes, and anything like that. Let's keep this is there. And anytime we're referring to something, we should have the info that person. Yep. And then the other thing was for more discussion is, what is our policy going to be if they say, no, I don't want to use my vote? Yeah.
Person.
Right, it's for.
So if that were the case, you would assume we stop the stipend,
Of course. Yes, that would be about amount.
and then we have to figure out, because in this role, I don't know how you function without. We got rid of the 2 ratings.
We do a burner phone, cheap burner phone, I don't know, I
I
don't
don't see one extent why, because everybody's okay with it today, because they're getting paid for it.
Yeah.
So no one has said, I'm not gonna use my phone because I'm super worried about data privacy or I'll turn my phone in. It's all about, are we gonna give them $40 a month?
and that's the other thing.
And I'm saying, no,
You're saying, no, we're not gonna give them $40 a month?
I would know, I change. Because if someone was super concerned about, I don't want you to call me my private phone, why did they not bring it out until say this way?
Part of that, I would, Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
part of that, I think would be, I think this is gonna be somewhat surprising to folks.
Yep.
I've been doing it for a long time, and when Genevieve provided me this, I looked into this from League of Minnesota Cities. And their recommendation of going back to 2 phones, like I explained earlier, I think this is gonna be somewhat nerve wracking to some folks possibly.
Yep.
I think it's the other way. Councilmember Alders, I think I could still talk folks into being able to use their personal cell phone, even if the stipend goes away. I think this one's just really gonna get them a little squirrely, the data practices stuff.
It's because.
You know, I think my public works folks aren't gonna text me back quite that some if I'm not paying them stipend. Probably not, but this may want them to make that personal phone strictly personal.
But to your point, you lose your only communication with the world, for
Yeah.
who knows how long till the city can go through it and figure out what's yours and what's not. And then you also expose, depending what you're using that phone for,
It's
all your games are now exposed.
In my case, my personal email's on my phone, separate than my work email, so now my personal email is all wrapped up into it because of work, because I have a work email.
And I have 5 emails,
Yeah, see,
so I'll have access to all.
yeah, they would.
And not that anybody would ever ask for any of our data.
You never know.
It's the kind of time, it's the time in this world now that is. I mean, it makes me, that's one of the reasons why I question that we should have separate ones for the city because it's happened now at my husband's work and at mine. That personal data has been asked. I got out of it only because I was quitting and I was separate, but I still may be called into it. So it's not fun to be in that position either, so.
And government is different than private.
Right,
We don't have the choice to say, I'm not giving you. But that doesn't mean one discussion.
I think it's pull up to you in fast food places, and give me your phone. You do it.
Yeah.
And like I say, you don't know when to get it back.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Mayor, I have, getting information on the number and code for the statute for the Practices Act. What would happen if an employee does not want to use their personal phone? And should the stipend continue?
Yeah, what would our policy be if they don't want to use it?
I think at the point of discussion, the stipend, council may decide it can go away. I think this will be more concerning than the stipend.
Yeah, because you have to consider the owner. Give them a phone, what are they gonna put on it perhaps, how do you control that? And when there's stuff that shouldn't be on there, how do you deal with that?
Well, that's under the IT policy.
Yeah,
So
and we have
that-
more control over that now because if we're paying for the building, you know, person. Yeah,
What's happening?
and I don't necessarily think that burner phone's the way to go. Because they do a lot of research, I do a lot of research on the phone. We were just looking at smoking receptacles and Eric's on his phone and I'm on mine, and we're looking for things. We're all work related, right? So I don't think a burner phone is
When I say that, I just mean
Yeah.
you know.
something.
And the question is, can you get a basic phone anymore?
Both my brothers do it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Burner phones got $40 to $60.
I was gonna say,
Uh-huh.
every child in my neighborhood has a flip phone.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's.
Can you do research on flip?
Yeah.
So that was going to be my next question is,
Harder.
I personally, I would think it would be helpful for this discussion to know what city work needs to be done on a phone. I think that would help the next step.
Would that depend on which shape, like, is it Public Works, is it Natalie, is it, so it would be dependent on who does what, right?
So let me ask that, Scott, you had said maybe no. But from she wouldn't be doing research on her phone. No. I mean, I can see where she might need it to be in touch with her election judges. But other than that, there's probably not a lot of business that she would have to do on the phone. Public Works is a whole different animal. But in the office, you have a computer.
Yeah, I'm not referring a lot to in the office, because I can do that on my computer. This is today. She's sending me stuff today and she's off.
Is she doing it on her phone or?
Yeah, no, on her phone, yeah.
But Mr. Mayor, that comes with another, to me, another issue. If you're on PTO, you shouldn't be working from.
She's sending me information I was pertinent tonight, so. If she chooses on her PTO to be able to send me an email, I don't see a problem. It's because she wanted to get it to me in a timely fashion. If someone's on PTO, I mean, how's that any different than anybody in this room getting hold of me on the weekend? I mean, it's no different. If she chooses to send something to me and she's on PTO, it's irrelevant to me.
Yeah, it just, the question would be to the council,
I'm sorry.
if we're gonna buy separate phones for everybody, who all gets them and why do they need them?
And I don't think it'd be I agree, I don't think it'd be
Mr. Mayor, to me, I would leave that decision, if we go the route of purchasing for employee use, it would be up to Scott to decide which of his employees who choose not to participate in the existing policy stipend or not. Who do you think would be required to carry it?
But Mr. Mayor, may I just interject again, we are designing, policy has to be able to be followed so that there is a policy. So, it would, non-discriminatory policy would look like public works employees are eligible for a phone due to the work that they do. So that there isn't a question of some, a part-time employee saying, well, they all got company phones, I want one too, so,
Yeah, do like by job description.
yes.
And I don't disagree with that, and if all of a sudden we grew by 15 employees and 5 of them were in the office, we may have to readjust that. So we're looking at this long term, but there'll always be some adjustments and stuff. Whatever happens and wherever it's, so.
So I added what do city employees do on a mobile device to help determine which roles would, you know, and maybe a phone isn't the best device, maybe a tablet makes more sense. Because tablets now can have mobile phone service, so my recommendation would be to find out what needs to be done and then have an idea of how best to get that. So. The time is 7:30.
Promise you, I won't send my public works guys with a tablet in there.
Yeah.
Maybe a whole new one.
FaceTime. FaceTime.
FaceTime, yeah.
Yeah, people do that.
I know, but I love my guys doing that one.
Yeah, no, maybe in the shop, in theory. And in part of that would be, I think, how much is an unlimited plan, if we are paying for phones in an unlimited plan necessary. Based on how much data they use.
How do you know how much data? I mean, I don't, my stuff is all unlimited, so I wouldn't know what I use for data.
My phone tells me,
Yeah, or you,
that you got 10% left.
Oh, so you're not unlimited.
so you
No,
don't
I'm
have.
not
But I'm unlimited, I have no idea, I don't.
No,
I don't, and they still tells, I don't.
It's pretty hard to use a,
Guys, name on it, on the account. And there's like 30 of us on that account.
On that.
it's pretty hard to use over data.
I've never seen
If,
it.
it's pretty hard to use over data unless you're basically playing games.
And I don't, I can't.
But you have
Reading,
different data.
reading stuff, listening to iPod, you know, like, what am I trying to think? Listening to.
iPads.
What, Pandora or something?
Yeah, this is, you know, I cannot think of the thing, a podcast, thank you, listening to podcasts, if you're, you know, you're looking stuff up, using the internet, I mean, it's pretty hard to go over that data.
It
So,
depends on what your data is. You have different options of data. You have different levels of data you can purchase, or you can go to the unlimited.
what I'm
So
saying,
for you, it might be hard, it may be hard to do it because you have the right plan, right? If you still have 10%. But if
I
you
don't have much on mine, I really don't, because I use my computer.
I'm just like, I'm unlimited because I'm using it all.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, we were looking at it for a city employee, and they wanted to, let's say the public works, if they're out driving in the truck and they wanna listen to,
Pandora.
yeah, they don't necessarily need to use the city's phone for that, they can use their own.
Right, oh, for sure.
You know, that's what I'm saying, it's like, right, so I'm just saying, there's certain, you know, a podcast, if you wanna listen to a podcast, you can listen to it on your own phone, you don't have
Yeah.
to,
For
we
sure.
don't have to pay for
So
that.
to the point that Jenny said, we need to find out what they're using it for from a city standpoint. So we can determine what the best plan is. And
Yeah, if you choose to give them cell phone.
Huh?
If you choose to give them cell phone.
Yeah, I don't know how. Yes, it seems a logical thing, if you're going to ask them to be in constant communication with city business, whether it's you or residents or. You know, the sheriff, you know, if they're gonna do city business, this kicks in. So they're out and somebody calls them on their phone to say a tree's down the road, city business.
And today, 189, yeah.
So I'm gonna guess this will say, if I'm gonna answer my phone, if they'd be one you pay for.
Yes, that would be a fair assumption.
Hey, and I'm gonna guess at some point the council's gonna say that too, let's get those tablets and devices, because. Not that I may. Councilor Raymond.
It would be interesting to know what other communities are doing with the change in community technology and things like that. What are they, what's Oak Grove doing, what is, you know, especially smaller communities where you probably don't have a radio system in your public works truck, so.
Yeah. meetings I've been to, local government officials meeting, and that was some mayors from Nowthen County here recently. And I didn't ask them what their second phone was, everybody had two phones. And, when they sent out an email, they were surprised, they assumed, because I put my email as mayor. They assumed that was the city one, but everybody else has a city email. So I'm guessing those second phones were probably city phones.
Yep. No, growth has their own email.
Are there on what?
Their own
Emails.
email.
Yeah, most of them have gotten emails. And I think that's
I'm thinking more
become a requirement.
what they're doing for the employees.
Yeah, I think it's either January or June of 2026. We're all gonna be required to have the .gov. And then I think it's gonna transition from 26, don't quote me on the month, but I think it's pretty accurate on 26, and then everybody has to have it fully implemented by 2028. The .gov piece.
All right,
Yes, it is coming, you are correct.
all right, 7:36.
Where did we end?
Rather than starting a new section. Call it night.
Second.
Very good. All right.
But.
Still on.